Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just going to give it a moment for everyone to log into Zoom and have the webinar session load for them before we get started. Looks like we have a good crowd joining us. We're just going to give it a few more moments, make sure everyone has a chance to log into the Zoom. Don't want them to miss anything. Okay, it looks like most people have had a chance to jump in. So hi, everyone. My name's Courtney Brown, and I'm a Senior Marketing Manager here at EDB. I'll be your host today for our webinar, Why I Picked Postgres Over Oracle. I'm joined by Jan Karamans, Director of Sales Engineering at EDB. Before I turn it over, I want to go through a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded. We'll be sharing the recording along with the slides after the broadcast to the email that you used to register for the webinar. All of your lines are currently muted. If you have a question, please feel free to submit it in the question panel. We expect the presentation to last most of our time today, but we'll allot any extra time to Q&A. If we don't have a chance to answer your question, we'll be sure someone follows up with you after our session. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Courtney. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, depending on the location and the time that you are either currently in or following this webinar. Very happy to see so many people come in. This is a little bit about my personal story, the reason why I actually picked Postgres over Oracle. And well, this is basically also the agenda. I will just go over these words and kind of give the perspective on how this plays into the Oracle versus Postgres comparison. So with that, we're going to dive in. This presentation I've done before in specific environments, in Oracle conferences, for instance. So just to make sure that everything is safe, Postgres is mostly harmless. We're not here to kind of badger anything or kind of set bad blood or whatever. It's an honest, open comparison and some of the reasons why you would potentially look at Postgres. As Courtney already said, if you have any questions, please submit them to the question section here in Zoom, and we'll be happy to dive into those and kind of go over some of the things that you might be thinking or that you might be considering around this topic moving forward. It's also going to be a bit more of a high level, so we're not going to really deep dive into this, but it's really what are some of the common things that we see with our customers? What are some of the common things that we see in the marketplace? What are some of the common things that you would kind of consider if you would be looking at picking Postgres over Oracle, right? In that sense. And, you know, as database people, I am a relational database person. As database people, we'll be looking obviously at the database side of things, especially with Oracle. In the end, we will double click on that a little bit as well. Oracle is a very broad offering to the market, right? So there is a lot of moving parts, a lot of things within that offering, but we really want to focus on databases because that's what we are here together for kind of to do. And just to make sure that everybody is kind of on the same level, again, from the database perspective, I always like to kind of show this picture quickly. It is, as you can see, the genealogy of relational databases, and what it at least depicts and highlights. And if you look at the slides afterwards, you can really dive into this a little bit further and kind of follow some of the lines. But what it gets down to is that databases, relational databases, come from the work that Cott and they did in the early 1970s of the last century in Silicon Valley, actually for IBM, writing relational database theory and actually building the system on top of that. So that is what you find in the green, staying on the left side of the screen, right? In the left bottom side of that Silicon Valley Bay Area Park, as it's written, is where relational databases started. And you see Oracle as a starting point there, as well as Berkeley Ingress. And as some of you might know, the gress in Postgres is actually the gress of Ingress, where Dr. Michael Stonebreaker started with Ingress. Then kind of when he did that project and actually created Ingress Corporation that we still know today and got back to Berkeley University, he started the post-Ingress project, which became Postgres. So that is a little bit to highlight that it's actually a valid choice, right? The picking of Postgres over Oracle. And a little bit from the mostly harmless side is what I'm not saying is that you must adopt Postgres, because that would be childish. There is the option. It's a possibility for you. And what I think, and from what I've learned over the past 5 years that I've been working on and with Postgres, well, you might have a very good option here to kind of really do that as well. Postgres is in nearly every organization, if not all, in some form or another. And you see the growth, and I have some considerations around that as well. You see the growth and the growing of Postgres continue nearly unstoppable. So that was a little sidestep. I have a couple of these sidesteps throughout the presentation whilst I go through these words, why I picked Postgres over Oracle. So that brings us to the very first word, the why. Why this presentation? Why would you even kind of want to stop and think about it? For me, this really was a journey. I started on Oracle many years ago. And during these years, you see, as often is in every business where change is the only constant, the world is changing. It's really a journey. And sometimes, you know, you need to do something else. It was Einstein that set the definition. If you continue to do the same thing, expecting different results, well, that's the definition of stupidity. So if you really want to do something else, if you want to boldly go where no one has gone before, and you know, with Postgres, that's not even the case anymore, because it's a threaded path. We saw that in that first slide with all of these lines. You know, Postgres has been around for over 30 years, so why not? Why not have the presentation? Why not look at Postgres? Why not do open source? Postgres really is part of the second wave of open source, where even the more difficult systems, where even the not so easy to replace systems are being replaced by open source. The traditional business model in that sense is changing. It's going away. You're not going to the store and buy a box with a CD or with floppies for that sense and kind of install a piece of software. It's completely different with cloudification, with all of these SaaS, IaaS, PaaS, what have you, solutions. And open source is very much about passion, right? It's the passion for the solution. It's the passion for the software. A lot of people contributing to open source solutions in general. Postgres being a little bit special in that sense, because you know, Postgres has the most liberal license in that sense, giving you the ability to actually really make a difference using Postgres and using open source. Talking about that, so and this is an off topic again, closed versus open source, and again, this is not a evaluation of the one or the other, but Closed source solutions are solutions that were developed to sell. The primary goal is to do business. Open source solutions are developed to solve a problem. The primary goal here is to solve a problem. If you look at that, the most basic example I always use of an open source solution is I write a script to do something in my day-to-day operation as a DBA. I give this script to my fellow DBA, say, hey, this is a cool script. It kind of works for me. He works with it. He adds something and then gives it back. That is kind of already a base open source because he is building on the software. It's my script, so I really can see what the software is. I don't just get the answer back from him. And that kind of helps in that respect. Another good thing with open source is you don't have to guess what's happening in the software. You can just take the source code and read why is it doing something where, just like you would read a script. So it's a if you're into those things, into reading C code, it's just a good read, right? One of the unique qualifications also is that you can then just take the open source solution and actually tailor it to fit specific needs that you or your organization might have. So that is another good thing about open source, I think, at least compared to some of the traditional solutions. What I've also said and noticed is that coming specifically back to Oracle versus Postgres, right? In the Oracle realm, there are people that make just their living from reverse engineering, right? So that is something that you can forego if you switch to open source. And basically, it's the same, be it different. It gives you the ability to refocus on the core. And in my closing statements, in my conclusions in the end, I will have some reflections on that, but you have the ability to really look at what am I trying to achieve with my software solution, with my project for my organization, right? And as challenges change for organizations, as new things are being demanded of the organization, right? That makes it a very good initiator to start looking at actually why would I stick with what I have? Why would I do a switch? And actually start thinking about these things. Makes sense, right? Well, the second word, I've been in IT since 1991. In Oracle, well, time measurement, you're always measured by which version you started with. So I started with Oracle version 6. I started on Postgres version 9.6, which is arguably quite a bit later. I did 101 different roles in the IT landscape from well, hands-on DBAing to marketing to sales to leadership roles or whatever. But actually really in the end found my way back to technology. And I'm a fierce supporter of something called DBA Dev and or Smart DB. The first thing focuses on how developers and DBA should really work together to build the best applications that they can. I think we all know this meme of this little girl looking mean into the camera while the house is on fire, with the remark, you know, it worked on my laptop, or now it's operations problem. The other tag is Smart DB, that really focuses on, should I build applications in middleware? The thing that kind of started in the 80s, 90s, you know, where host-based applications were being replaced by client server and or middleware-like solutions. Databases are the best used if you take code and let that live very close to the data itself, right? So that's something happening there as well. And I was at one time an Oracle ace, but you know, that kind of weathered away when I started looking at Postgres. So my history, I said it a little bit already, database operator, administrator, consultant manager, ended up on the dark side of things in the pre-sales realm. And just to point that out once more, I give it a little bit perspective in the years. I started on DataPoint RMS. I don't think too many people will remember that. From there, Oracle and VAX on VMS, Open VMS, Oracle on HP Unix, Oracle on Linux, and only in 2016 it became Postgres on Linux to complete the full open stack. And this is also where you see the first and the second wave of open source, right? For me personally, that first wave was 1997 to 2010 when I moved from HPUX to Linux. The second wave really came in that second span of time, 2010 to 2016, where also the database, the complex system got moved from closed source to open source. And this is something we see in the field. We're in the rollout of that second wave now, where you know it's totally accepted that we do complex systems also in open source. Community-centric is something super important now. That was already true, as I said, in the Oracle time. I was a little bit late to the game personally. I think in a community, and this is what sets IT apart from a lot of other domains, sharing is multiplying. The open source movement, what I said in the beginning with the script, right? I share my script with my neighbor. If you look at really community open source solutions, they're built in sharing. I want to share the solution I found and perhaps somebody else can improve on it, right? And if you then start comparing these communities together, so the Oracle or the traditional community of end users and the Postgres community, which is very much more a developer community, development aimed at developing the core product. It's a very, very cool community, but it's got a little bit of a different vibe, right? So that's kind of a little bit to myself. Then we get to the third word, picked. What can you say think about picking? If you look at it traditionally, why would you traditionally pick something like Oracle? What was my consideration back in the day? I obviously sat down for the webinar and thought a little bit about, you know, why. I don't even think there was really a specific choice. There was, you know, Oracle was just the easy pick. It was the only truly usable, bigger relational database out there, and that everybody was using it. I think we were in economic times there where, you know, you didn't have to think so much about budgets. We just had the .com bubble and everybody was investing in IT. That was very important to kind of drive this forward. So you just took the Oracle database. It was the obvious thing to do, right? Moving forward, and that just stayed. You stayed at the system. So this is really from a traditional perspective looking at this. And really, there was also not a reason to do very much. You know, don't fix it if it ain't broke is one of those things that comes around. Why would I fix something if it isn't broke? My system was running. Often we get asked about Oracle migrations, and it's core infrastructure that you're going to change. It's not something that you would easily do. And if the system is running, then there was no penalty in doing nothing. And IT was cool. There was a lot of stuff happening. We didn't really have the drive to do a lot of other things. There was software development where we could focus on other things that would take our energy. And going through this motion and actually not working or not considering that any further, you build up a mortgage. And I had a discussion with a customer a little while back, said, we dug ourselves in a hole. We invested so much in existing things that getting out now is going to be very hard. And we're compelled to, because we need to make certain changes in the way that we work with, in their case, migration to cloud, right? So you're building up a mortgage, and as long as you don't run into that mortgage, as long as you don't run into the pain, there is no compelling event to do anything, right? So it was also the easy thing to do. As a sidestep, again, core infrastructure. If you start looking at Oracle, and I think I see one or two questions coming in on that as well. If you look at Oracle Real Application Cluster or Active Data Guard, you would say, these are things that really bind me to Oracle. But if you have the opportunity to kind of step back and look at what are actually the requirements, you start looking at what then Postgres brings, right? With the streaming replication, with load balancing, with bidirectional replication, the new tool that is now coming to the market. You can build really high available environments on the one hand. If you look at disaster recovery, everybody trusts RMAN. If you start looking at the Postgres environment, we have Barman or PG Backrest, which are tried and tested solutions for disaster recovery scenarios within Postgres. If you look at integration, and integration is one of those topics that is really, really important in that sense, and where Postgres is also really, really powerful. On the Oracle side, you would look at Golden Gate. With Postgres, you would look at logical replication. Again, PG logical, BDR, or you would start looking at foreign data wrappers. And I think we could easily fill a complete webinar just on foreign data wrappers and the way that they open up the relational database really to be a data processing platform in itself, if you like, right? That give you the ability to connect to so many different data sources and really build a truly fully integrated solution around Postgres. In that sense, contradictory to what we saw in the previous slide, businesses are changing. So the do nothing scenario gets harder and harder to maintain. This is some of the discussions that we currently have on a daily basis. This is what I was seeing in my own practice. You start seeing things like agility coming. The way we build applications today is vastly different from how we did that when I started in IT. So you start talking about completely different ways of how an application is built, how an application is structured around microservices, for instance, how availability, maintainability for applications gets more and more key, where you see things like the cost of building an application, running and maintaining an application, the cost of having applications be not available. So there is so much changing and growing and getting more mature around the way that businesses adopt IT, that businesses work with how applications help in make the difference in competitive edge for an enterprise in that sense. So the development, the deployment of applications, well, we all know all of these new paradigms coming up. Sticking with traditional ways, how databases, how data processing is deployed in organizations, it is still happening massively, but what you are seeing as well is that everybody's rethinking some of these strategies, and perhaps they want to move away and looking for ways to do that, and then going to completely new ways of doing this is actually what they're trying to achieve. So you see DevOps coming, right? Continuous integration, continuous development, CI/CD integration, deployment, containerization, cloud native Postgres here. A lot of these mechanisms and pieces of technology are here to help build that highly available and always on application experience. And again, back to that little girl that was looking over her shoulder, and this always makes me think of a keynote I had in Riga a couple of years ago, where this guy was telling he was heading up a software development team, and they were doing a rollout. And obviously that rollout failed. It failed on the Sunday night, and on the Sunday night, his CEO called him, telling him, "Al, how the hell could you do this? And now my IT infrastructure, my application is unavailable." And his remark was, "Well, it worked on my computer," where his CEO said back, "Well, you know, I'm not really paying you to make it work on your computer. I am paying you to make it work on my computer." And the cool thing with all of these new technologies and all of this new ways of deployment, especially with containerization, with the immutable infrastructures, you are actually already building it on their computer, because there is no more difference between my and your computer, because you know it's that same container image. So I thought that was funny and relevant here. There is a lot of confusion, I guess, still. Confusion about, you know, what actually do we need to do? What are the best technology choices that we can make in the organization? Are we going to stick with what we did in the past because we know and trust this? And that also kind of goes a little bit to the competition, right? It's not competition inside. You're not just facing yourself, that you have to convince that some of this quote unquote new technology, or at least a changed approach to some of these problems are good. You have colleagues that perhaps have different ways that they want to kind of stick with what they've known, or even competition outside of your project, outside of your company, through people that you work with, through partners or suppliers that say, you know, we're going to stick with this because this is tried and tested. And so trying to kind of change the vision on the business in that sense is trying. And it takes a bit of courage and a bit of guts to kind of make that step. Why I picked word number 3, Postgres. So what actually is Postgres? And you know, how does this fit into this discussion? I think, and this is now really changing. It's seriously changing. When I started with EDB, I guess it was in that final stage of really changing. The visibility, the best hidden secret. People knew about Postgres, but didn't really know about Postgres. Simple reason is, you know, what I said in the beginning, closed source solutions built to sell, open source solutions built to solve a problem. if I make a script and if I share my script with you, there is no imperative drive for me to market that. If you look at the Postgres community itself, it has no drive, it has no means to do marketing. That means this super cool database with all these kind of capabilities is sitting out there, but there is really no driver in the sense of, hey, come do our webinars. Basically what EDB and what some of the other companies in the Postgres space do to some extent is actually making this marketing for something like Postgres. So we're getting a little bit, and again, as written, it's changing. We're getting a little bit out of this area of the hidden secret. One of the things that also pays into here quite a bit is Metcalfe's law. So as an extent to Moore's law, you could say, and this is what the graph on the right side of the screen also depicts. The more people that start working with an open source solution, the more eyes you get on the code, the more people that get interaction with it, the stronger and usable Postgres becomes. That is true for any open source solution. So that means that over time, as more people adopt Postgres and is being used for more and broader and more interesting use cases, that actually helps contribute to the visibility of Postgres, the strength of Postgres, the ability to take on ever larger use cases as we move forward. Right. So that is one of those things around Postgres. What I said, the build to sell, build to solve. A cool thing about the Postgres community, I think at least, is that it is a completely independent movement, if you like. One of the things that we internally say every now and then is, well, without Postgres, no EDB, but without EDB, Postgres would just go on, right? Postgres is something that is driven by people that actually have the passion for the solution, that really want to focus on these features actually add value for business. We're not trying to, the Postgres community is not trying to build a feature list and then move towards a specific release date, and all of these features need to be in here, right? If a feature has been built and is good enough, it will make the next version. If it's not good enough, then it's just going to be the next version. I had a couple of discussions with Bruce Momjun about this as well. If you look at the Postgres source code, it's engineer's code. It's like, if you get in there, it's this people who are in motorsports, Formula One paddocks. If you look in the paddock, it's squeaky clean. Everything is polished. Everything is bright. There is no clutter. Everything makes sense. Everything is exactly where it needs to be. This is how you would look at the Postgres core code, source code. Everything is in its place. All indentations are correct. Even the source code comments are spell checked, because people from all over the world need to be able to read, interpret, and potentially contribute to the source code. So it's really, really, really shiny engineered code. And that also is one of the reasons why there are so few bugs with Postgres. This kind of passion, this kind of drive, together with the independence, makes for a super, super strong platform, which you now see being adopted by a lot of customers, a lot of partners, a lot of players in the area. If you look at cloud native databases, a lot of those are based on Postgres. So that is one of those things that is happening there. If you really want to dive a little bit into, okay, but how does this then work? Proprietary software versus open source software and the life cycles. And for me, it was a very insightful presentation, both in recording and in slides. If you go to momgen.us, the site of Bruce Momgen, and you will look for the presentation, Will Postgres Live Forever? I think that gives a good extra insight into how does this mechanism actually work? How does it kind of work together? If you look into that. In that Postgres realm, we obviously have this company EDB that I'm happy to represent here this afternoon or today for you. For me, EDB around Postgres was the vehicle of choice. I came from an enterprise Oracle world, right? I'm not a developer. I'm not a C code writer. I am a database administrator. I'm a developer. I'm perhaps a bit of an advocate, right? So I need a vehicle where I can kind of work with Postgres and actually see how we can work together with customers, with partners I wrote massive Postgres. What I mean by that is we have customers that use Postgres for really high demand core applications, core banking applications, core productive applications. Do that at scale, do that in super high demanding environments. So that was a very interesting area to kind of look into and to work with. The Oracle and Postgres thing for an Oracle DBA getting here was for me super interesting. So that is EDB in that sense. EDB is a global player. Company has offices all over the world. It is the E of EDB stands for enterprise. The focus that the company has to really work with enterprise organizations to position Postgres and to really help make a difference for those organizations to get to a next level data processing platform, if you like. And EDB also contributes to core Postgres. We make a great big bunch of tools around Postgres, both in Oracle migration settings, both in if you have enhanced security demands, either coming from data privacy or other sites where the community is still working on this. So we have extensions on top of Postgres that help address some of these use cases while the community is still looking into that. Additionally, in building of extensions around Postgres, supporting extensions, the foreign data wrappers that help connect Postgres to other data sources in organizations. The multi-model, the polyglot persistence around Postgres is something that EDB works together with the organization really to build out the usage of Postgres and the ability of Postgres to do really next level things within organizations to help support these high-end applications. And this goes a little bit back to, and it's written on the slide as well, the smart DB. So Postgres does support procedural languages. That was something in the beginning I ran into a lot. You know, we're using Oracle Apex or we're using Oracle PL SQL, and this is something where a good friend of mine, Toon Koppelaars, did a lot of investigation. Where the story was, you know, if you build an application, if you use a good middleware time frame, a middleware implementation, how can I then build applications? Java is the fastest way to do this. And he basically empirically proved that if you do it smart, and that's where the smart DB comes from, if you do it smart and you start creating like small data services within the database and actually have your application connect to those, that works faster. But that's a mindset shift. And this is then perhaps I could have made it a sidestep or an off topic here, but this is really something that you can continue to do with Postgres, because Postgres also supports this data-centric processing. It supports even in more ways than a traditional Oracle database would. Well, this is nearly the last word, over. Open or closed source, we saw that already. Sometimes a black box suffices, sometimes code access is crucial. You see a bit of a shift here, where, you know, traditionally those an Oracle database, you just use it and it suffices, right? But what you start seeing by all of these new demands, it might be crucial to get access to the code for performance, solving of performance issues, and you know, really understanding why is something processed in a specific way. So this is one of the things where, you know, it could be the consideration in would I choose left or right. And one of the things that we see is that this black box approach, where, you know, sometimes you might say the black box is sufficient. If you don't want to have the trouble of having to set too many parameters, if you don't want to have the trouble of tweaking or tuning a lot with specific things, then, you know, you can just leave it. On the other hand, if your application starts growing, if your use cases or if your demands to the solution start changing, then that might be really tricky. And that's not just with the traditional vendors. If you start looking at some of the open source, quote unquote, open source solutions in cloud vendors, for instance, Amazon RDS is a favorite topic to pick on from my side, at least. With regards, or in comparison, I should say, with regular Postgres, standard Postgres gives you then a lot more abilities to tweak and tune and kind of really play with it. So that's at least something to be very aware of in that sense. It could be your focus, right? Automation, DevOps, and all the cool things that we talked about a little bit before, or perhaps you don't care. You know, it's just something that needs to work. It's not your mission to develop or to do something about that. You're not really driven to think differently about some of the things. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So that is playing into that as well. Red over blue. What I said in the beginning, when I started in my database career, there was also a little bit of red and blue, but that was more like IBM's DB2 mainframe versus an Oracle database. And then the Oracle database was the cool new agile thing. So it's a traditional thing. There is religion. What I mentioned with some of the competition you could even have within the organization or with, and this is a real thing. We've seen discussions where arguments weren't really traded. You know, this is how we do it, and this happens automatically. We don't really have to know anything. So that's becomes then a little bit of a non-discussion, right? Where you can come with arguments, but so in that sense, the picking of left or right gets a little bit hard then. And then finally, Oracle itself. Oracle is a big company. I think they've got 70,000 employees or something. What I've learned over the years that Oracle is really focused at big clients. That's an open door. That's you could almost say that's a stupid remark here, but they're focused on big projects within big clients. A very interesting thing that I learned personally, Oracle back in the day had something called OVM, Oracle Virtual Machine. It was based on KVM, and I was working for a smaller organization thinking, well, I was an Oracle partner. I was completely painted red in the Oracle color. And I thought, let me start working with OVM because it's Oracle, it should be good. And what I quickly found out was that it was extremely hard to get OVM to do what I needed it to do. And I started thinking, why on earth is this part of the portfolio? And a couple of years later, I spoke to somebody who was working for a big organization. I mean, a really big organization. And he said, OVM was the best thing that ever happened to us because we were able to take a team of 4 architects, 2 months to build and configure and tweak and tune OVM to do exactly what we needed it to do. But they had the economy of scale to actually make that investment. So if you start looking at large, Oracle is or was or is relevant, right? But it's getting to be for the bigger customers. If you want to start looking at something you can use across the board, or you can use from very small to very big, this probably isn't a very good solution. What I said, it's economy of scale. It makes sense at scale. If you are a company that only wants to do Oracle, and then not just from a database perspective, obviously, but from applications, hardware, software, whatever. If you just want this one single company, then Oracle might be something you would be able to consider. And what we see today is that a lot of companies are actually thinking twice about that. Because of this thing of diversification, right? So that is really something that is you need to be mindful of, you need to be aware of, that this is not a one-trick pony in that sense. So from why I picked Postgres over Oracle, what are some of the lessons that I at least learned and I want to share with you here? What do I need? What does my project need? What should be our focus? Where should we go if we want to take this project and make it a success? Not just look at shiny boxes, but really go back and look at my requirements. What is my budget requirement? What are my availability requirements? How do I need to deploy it? Does it work in the ways that I need the solution to work? What should be my focus, and really weigh your needs in that sense, and not pick something that, that eventually will dig you the hole where you get stranded in. And don't be afraid, right? You're not alone. One of the imperative things is technologically, it's never an issue. And there is what I mean by not too much fresh wine. You have this idea in IT that everything changes from ground off every 6 months or something, and everything is completely new. In the end, it's reusing of the same technology. If you really start to look into it, there isn't really nothing new. Even Postgres is not new. It's been tried and tested and always been around there, right? So whatever you do, it's always a matter of determination and of choices, of some of this religious stuff, and actually the ability to really look at requirements and what you want to achieve with what you want to do. And then again, small to big, it was something that in the early days, Oracle also said, there is an Oracle database on my phone, back into all the way up to this conglomerate bank. We all say it, Postgres actually does it. we don't need the promises, we need the proof. If you go to your active network component, good chances there is a Postgres database in it. If you open up your video recorder, there might be a Postgres database in it, all the way to going to American Express, to one of the bigger credit card organizations in the world. There will probably be Postgres databases there managing your transactions going forward. So, final lessons learned when it comes to databases. Databases that truly need to do something, that truly need to make a difference in your organization. Well, Postgres might just be your best bet for the future. So that's a little bit the message that I wanted to share here with you this afternoon. If you want to stay in touch, you can use any of these. And with that, for me, that's it. But I would like to give a little shout out to Bruce Momjun for his inspiration in my Postgres journey here so far. And with that, Courtney, I'm handing it back to you.
Sure. Thank you so much. So we had a few questions come through on the panel. I think you answered a few of the first ones that came in. Let's see, how scalable and sustainable is Postgres as compared to Oracle when it comes to very large databases, which could be online transaction processing or data warehousing?
Postgres is, in that sense, just as more or less just as scalable as an Oracle database in that sense. It's not so much about the size of the database. So it depends a little bit on how you define VLDBs. VLDB defined as in terabyte size, I don't think there is very much of a difference between Oracle and Postgres. If you look at VLDBs from a working set, Postgres is pretty scalable. The scalability of a relational database in the end is about the hardware, is about IOPS, and about all of those good things that kind of are handled by the database. So I would say it's pretty comparable. So I would like to see the challenges where the Oracle database would go beyond a Postgres database when it comes to these kind of challenges.
Okay, we'll just take one more question just to give people time between meetings, and we'll follow up, like I said, with any questions that weren't answered. But one question that came through, wanted to know if you could just discuss briefly the security when using an open source product.
Yeah, that's actually a very good and interesting question. The first and simplest answer is an open source database, or an open source product for that sense, inherently is more secure than a closed source product. And this is an interesting discussion in the sense that, people will say, yes, but I can just look at the source code and see where the vulnerabilities are. So every hacker can look into the source code and see where vulnerabilities are. True. That also means that everybody who's trying to protect those vulnerabilities also can see them, because they can read the exact same source code, right? So it's super easy to safeguard a vulnerability in an open source product. It's even much easier to fix a vulnerability in an open source project, because you can just suggest a patch and that patch will be applied, right? So that's security in open source is on a higher level than it is in closed source, would be my answer. And I hope that answers the question as well.
Great, thank you so much. So I think all these other questions we'll take offline and we'll circle back with you, but we just wanted to take a chance to say thank you so much for joining us today. Jan, thank you so much for telling your story.
You're welcome.
And we will follow up with the recording and slides after the fact. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.